So as you can see, the model is completely UV unwrapped. Now we need to get it into this particular grid space here. Now, as said in previous videos, you need to assign the shell based on how much surface area it has in the scene. What I mean by that is if this, say, the specific area here, you can see that the UV shell is quite large, so it would have so much detail, but we don't need that much space. So we need to scale it down appropriately. As you can see here, something like this would be just about right. You may need to actually scale it out a little bit, because again, this can be a very difficult process. You know, you have to sort of make compromise trying to get everything to fit in this particular scene here, but I do believe that this will probably be the best solution. The best thing to do is always have a checkered texture on your model. Maya 2015 does actually have an option for that. If you see here, this particular button here, assign the sort of overlaying checkered texture, which I can then start using to scale this appropriately. The things you should look out for are stretch UVs. Unfortunately, this is not a really good example of that, because this does look like it will require a bit more. If the checkered texture looks a bit funny to you, you don't like the look of it, you can just press this button here. It gets rid of the texture, so you can just sort of work on a sort of a grayscale here. I always like to use that because I don't like the checkered look. It kind of messes with my eyes a little bit. Okay. So one thing you should look out for is stretch UVs. So, for example, with this one here, if I make this smaller, you can see how the squares are stretched across. That's not a good thing. That will definitely show up when you texture it. Say, for example, you've got a brick texture around this, you'll notice that the bricks are very much more stretched across it because it's just not taking up enough surface area. So that's something you try to avoid at all costs. Try to make everything look like an actual square, like this for example. If it's like that, then it's definitely going to be okay. Also, the more squares are on screen, basically assigns to more detail. So if I make this larger, you can see there's far more squares evident, which means it's going to be a very high detailed. But again, this is too big, so I just try to assign as much space as you possibly can. I'll just go into this right now because I can't really work with that. So I'll just start assigning space. I'm going to do it as quickly as possibly can. Realistically, you should be taking as much time as you possibly need because this is a very important aspect of modeling, is UV unwrapping. If you don't UV correctly, then it's just not going to look good. For example, as you can see here, these specific UVs are very much stretched, which I believe, if I go to UV, I can probably find these. Yeah. I may need to go in and sort of mess with these a bit more. These do look like they will need more. It can take a while, so you best put as much time and effort as you need be. Again, as you can see here, these are very much stretched, so I'm going to sort of go in and sort of painstakingly move these UVs around so I get a better may take time, but it will definitely be worth it in the end. So I've cut out me messing around with these UVs, and as you can see, I've already scaled them in. Obviously, to scale, you press R, so just start scaling them wherever you need them. I've scaled them according to how much space they need. So obviously, as you can see, the top of the table here requires a lot of space in the UVs because, you know, a lot of detail needs to be here. Same with the sort of support and the lower parts. There's quite a nice bit of detail there. Again, the bigger the UV shells are, the more detail will be on them. I could possibly get rid of the bottom areas. If the players can't see that part, I may get rid of that. That gives me more space. Again, that's a good benefit of deleting faces that aren't needed, because then you have much more space to work with. So if I was to delete this, for example... Oops, sorry, let me just... Yes, if I delete these faces here, so if the player can't ever see these faces, then there's much more room for me to assign onto these areas here. So don't forget to delete areas where players can't possibly see them. So if a player was able to get under this table, say for example in a stealth game like Dishonored, I would have to have the bottom part of the table. So I assigned it all accordingly. As you can see here, the edgings are very small. They could possibly be stretched out a little bit more. But yeah, there's space here. But if I had small objects on the table like a cigarette tray, I could possibly add it into these little areas here. Try to use as much of the area as you possibly can. Now once you're done with this, you go to polygons, UV snapshot, and then give it its size. Obviously you press browse. Ooh, let me just browse. It'll go into your images and you give it a name whatever you want. So I'll just call it table underscore UV. Give it a file size and a file type. Always go for PNG, that way you can, because PNGs don't have any backgrounds. So if you put it into Photoshop, you can have it as a top layer and you can sort of see where everything is. Always go in the power of 2, so 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, 2048 by 2048, and I believe it's 4098 by 4098. Always go for bigger file sizes first. This is mainly because you can reduce them as you go along. So say for example for this table, I'll export it as a 2048 map, but realistically the final texture will not be that big because it doesn't need to be that big. At most it'll probably be a 2048 or a 5x12 map. As you know, unless it's a vector image, you can't upscale it. If you upscale an image, it's going to become pixelated, but you can downscale it. So I'd go for a higher one first and then downscale later. So press OK. Well, obviously make sure you click on the object first. Press OK, and it will save it out. So hopefully you got a little bit of an idea of how to UV unwrap. It is a hard process to get down, but always remember, go for the planar and the cylindrical mapping as your main ones. The spherical you may want to go for depending on what you're using, and always manipulate always manipulate the UVs in the scene. For example, this one here, I could go in and still keep manipulating it. Obviously you can try unfolding. Like say for example, if I unfold this, it gives me a very odd shape, and as you can see, it's not very good. However, I could fix this if I want to, as I can see here that the spacing actually is a lot better than what I've done. So if I wanted to go in and fix this, I can go to UVs, click on individual UVs, and if you hold X, you can snap to grid, so you can sort of slowly start snapping these back into place. It can be a very long procedure. Obviously for this one it's not a very good idea to do that, but as you can see, there are a lot of ways that you can manipulate the UVs, so you can snap them to grid. So if you've got like wonky edges or it's a bit disproportionate, you can just snap the UVs to the grid. That way you can straighten them out much nicely. So hopefully you've taken away how to sort of UV, or the basis of UV unwrapping. Thank you all for watching. Okay, this is a good example here. If they're flipped, they usually should be red. For some reason it's not red here. I think I've encountered an error for some reason. But if they're red, that can cause issues. Say for example, if you're trying to have sort of tileable sort of walls, the textures are going to be on the other side. And also if you're trying to saw UVs, they'll sometimes become inside. They'll saw inside the actual shell. You may have encountered that in the past where you've sort of thought, oh, why is it going inside? It's because they're flipped. So always have the UV shaders on, and then if there's any shells that are seen to be red, flip them using these two tools here. For some reason, I have encountered an error where it's not showing it specifically, so I'm going to have to select all the UVs and flip them automatically like that. Yeah, that's fixed it.